Okay, everyone. So I want to go ahead and talk about citation formats, and I'm going to go over APA and Chicago, but I want to go over APA primarily since that's what most of you are using anyway. But if you're using APA right now for your other classes and for your major, go ahead and use APA. If you're using Chicago for your major, go ahead and use Chicago. Either one is fine. You don't have to learn another citation format for the sake of this class. So just use the citation format that you're using currently when you're writing your papers, your formal written papers. So that's what we're going to do there. By the way, the other thing I want to mention before we get into the keynote is that there will be a workshop after this. So it'll be linked right underneath this in Blackboard. And just note that, yes, the examples are going to be done in APA. That's just for the purposes of the workshop. But if you're using Chicago largely, outside of that workshop, you feel free to go ahead and use Chicago. That's just for the purposes of the workshop. So let's get to it. So when it comes to citation formats, the role of citations help in the academic process to research and challenge the finding of another's work. And it's kind of this like cycle of there's a study and then analysis and then opinions are written from that and then critiques are made. And in order for us as a community, as a scientific community, to look at, how those studies and analyses were done, people need to be able to cite their work, cite where things were getting from, because then the experiments and the studies and the data can be replicated and critiqued and challenged. And it goes on and on and on until we get to academic consensus, which, sometimes doesn't happen. And oftentimes when it does, it comes from this ongoing process of study, analysis, opinion, critique, study, analysis, opinion, critique. But the idea primarily with citations is it lets the reader know which ideas are your own and which are the ones that are from someone else. And that's the great thing when you're writing a paper. If you're writing something and there's no citation there, the idea is that, okay, I guess it's coming out of your own head. If you are citing something, that means that you are attributing where that came from. So that's the importance of that, because then if people want to, let's say that you're writing a longer, study, and somebody wants to be able to understand like where you got these things from, to understand like where your data, is formulated from, they can find it by using the citations. And it's really important to have that, because you'll notice when you start doing academic research, we're looking at journal articles, for instance, it's going to be imperative upon you to have those citations from your authors, because then you can find other work that is derivative of what they're talking about. So it's really important to do that. And so there are two primary formats that we're usually talking about. It's APA, the American Psychological Association, and that uses an in-text parenthetical citation and a works cited page. And then we have Chicago, and that uses, there's a couple styles of it, but the one that I prefer to talk about is the footnote citation. So you have a citation at as a footnote, and then you have a works cited page as well. So both of these also just have works cited pages in general. You are expected, regardless of your citation format, you are expected to be doing a works cited page. So make sure that with all formal papers or formal assignments that a works cited page is included. Just put it this way: if you have to cite something, you have to put a works cited page. So let's look at APA format. So there's two things. We're primarily looking at journal articles and newspaper articles right now. So we're going to look at what those elements are. So for a journal article, you're going to have the last name, the year, and the page number. That's going to be the in-text parenthetical citation. So that's what you're going to be putting in within your paragraph, within your sentence as you're citing it. With a newspaper article, most newspaper articles are electronic now. So God bless you if you're pulling out a physical copy of the New York Times, but most people aren't. So you just need the last name and the year. You'll notice that in the works cited page, newspaper articles will typically include the full URL, whereas journal articles will include the page number, and it also will have something called a DOI, so Directory of Information. So we'll get into that when we go into researching journal articles. So when it comes to general rules of citing, this just talks about everything in general, not just APA, but if it does not come out of your own head, cite it. Cite frequently, cite often. It's really important for you to cite, particularly in this class. Make sure that you're citing, because here's the thing. no one's ever going to get mad at you for citing too much. Someone might tell you, hey, you can cool it down on the sites. But if you cite too little, then somebody could misinterpret that as plagiarism, and then you're in front of an ethics board determining whether or not you're going to get expelled. So it's always preferable to cite more often, because of the fact that it also, not only does it, just protect you, but at the same time, it clarifies what are your ideas and what comes from other sources. So if it does not come out of your own head, cite it. And the 2 elements for a newspaper, or 3 elements if it's a journal, should always be in the sentence in some way. Now, they can be in prose within the body text of your paper. So if we look at this example, Trevelyan 2017 notes that sea levels are rising, page 707. You'll notice that we have the last name, we have the year, and those are in APA, that's always going to be next to each other. Last name, year. It doesn't matter if it's at the beginning of the sentence within prose, or if it's at the end of the sentence as a parenthetical citation like we see in the second example. The last name and the year are always going to be next to each other. And then notes that sea levels are rising, page 707. You notice that because of this, there's a page number. We can infer that this is a journal article. So this is page 707. We make sure we put that at the end. Notice that the period is after the parenthetical citation. Now let's take a look at this. If you're doing just a straight up parenthetical citation, so the entire citation is at the end. So a recent study notes that sea levels are rising. You notice how we changed the wording a bit. So now we have last name, year, page number. You notice again in the parenthetical citation, last name, year, and then page number. So you're always going to have those 3 elements when it's with a journal. If this was a newspaper, you would just leave out the page number. So let's look at some news articles and example a little deeper. Since the nature of news sources are now electronic, you only need the name and year. So let's look at examples. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of different ways to say the same sentence. So if you're mentioning, for instance, the first one mentions the actual publication. According to a piece in the New York Times, quote, the president has not yet made a statement, end quote, Safin 2007, period. You notice that the period is after the parenthetical. It's not within the quotation mark like it typically would be without it. So let's look at this next sentence. According to Safin 2007, the president has not yet made a statement. Well, we're mentioning the author. So according to Safin 2007, then we're attributing dialogue. So we're going to go ahead and put a quote, comma right there. We open up the quotation. The president has not yet made a statement. You notice that the period is back inside the quotation mark. Because we don't have a parenthetical citation, we put the period back where it was within the quotation mark. The thing that you need to know is the fact that when you have a parenthetical citation at the end of something, like we see in the first and the last examples, it's because the citation is part of the sentence. You're still letting people know like where this piece of information came. And so the period is to signify the end of the sentence and the end of the idea in its entirety, which is why we put the period at the end of the parenthetical citation. So let's take a look and see if we just wanted to paraphrase and not mention the author until the end, and we just wanted to mention the publication. The New York Times state that the president has not yet made a statement, Safin 2007. You notice we put the period in there. We're not quoting anything because we're just paraphrasing it, but we always have the last name and the year. So let's continue. Let's look at, for instance, if we had one author, we can go ahead and adjust those. And you'll notice from here, just these are the way that the examples are going to be throughout the rest of these slides. So when we have one author, according to Drax 2007, the data suggests that little can be done by U.S. intervention. Notice the name, last name, and year, always together. The period is inside the quotation mark because we're not using a page number. Or what we can do is a 2007 study by the UN states, comma, quotation mark, the data suggests that little can be done by U.S. intervention. Drax 2007. Well, here's an interesting thing. I already said 2007, a 2007 study. Why do I need to put 2007 in the citation? Because the study could have been done in 2007, but it doesn't necessarily mean it was published in 2007. It could have easily been published in 2008, 2009. So just because the study happened in 2007, the date where it says Drax 2007, that year needs to be the year of publication. So, and then let's look at this last one where we're using the author, but we're just paraphrasing. Drax 2007 argues that little can be done by U.S. intervention. Let's look at two authors. According to Green and Largo 2015, gun violence has risen by 20% since 2012. You notice this really hasn't changed too much from our one author. All you're basically doing is saying Green and Largo. And it's the same thing when you go to the second, when you go to our second example, where you're putting it as a parenthetical citation. A recent study on gun violence found a rise of 20% since 2012, parentheses Green and Largo. And you notice that the period is at the end of the parenthetical citation, but in the first one, it's still within the quotation marks. Let's look at three authors. It's just adding more. According to Carver, Sanchez, and Stromberg, 2019, gun violence has risen by 20% since 2012. You're just adding another name, except this time now you're just putting commas in between it, which, for those of you who remember, that would have been Rule 3, items in the series. A recent study on gun violence found a rise of 20% since 2012. Since we're paraphrasing here, and we're just putting in the parenthetical citation, Carver, Sanchez, and Stromberg. So you're just adding your names. Now, let's say if we want to look at an academic journal example. So let's say that we're doing, here's a similar kind of sentences, but now let's say that we wanted to include page numbers with those. So if this was an academic journal with page numbers that we were citing, let's take a look at this. According to Drax 2007, the data suggests that little can be done by U.S. intervention, page 27. The thing you should notice now is the period has now left that quotation mark, and page 27 now is put there. So we got it. That's still part of the sentence because it's the citation is still part of the whole idea that we're saying. So the period has to be after the parenthetical citation. So after the page number. Or if we looked at the paraphrase, a 2007 or the quote, a 2007 study by the UN states the data suggests that little can be done by U.S. intervention. Drax 2007, page 27. You notice in here, since it's at the end, the parenthetical citation has all three of the elements we need because we're talking about an academic journal now. So Drax 2007, page 27. Or if we wanted to paraphrase, Drax 2007 argues that little can be done by U.S. intervention, page 27. Let me just put the period there. Now, let's say if we want two authors in an academic journal, you're noticing a pattern here. We're just including the names, and then the page number goes at the end. You move your period. You notice that now the period is moved to after page 471 instead of being after gun violence has risen by 20% since 2012, quote. You notice that the period is left being before the quotation mark and is now after the parenthetical where the page number is. But if we were to do the paraphrase down and the second example, you'll notice it's just Green and Largo 2015, page 471. We're including all of our information just at the end of the parenthetical citation. So let's take a look at three authors. According to Carver, Sanchez, and Stromberg, gun violence has risen by 20% since 2012. You're noticing a pattern. You're just putting your page number at the end, or you're including it in total in the parenthetical citation at the end of the paragraph. But so you're noticing the page number is always at the end, either by itself or with all the other information. Now, here's an interesting thing. If we have four or more authors, here's where it gets fun. You can do, according to Whitaker et al., 2019, gun violence has risen by 20% since 2012, page 471. So according to Whitaker et al means and everybody else. So it's Latin, et al, just and everyone else. So Whitaker would be the first named author of the journal article, or maybe you have a newspaper article that has like 7 people on it. So you would just put the first name. If you've ever taken the time to notice, those names are not in alphabetical order, and there's a reason for that. The people who are first are usually the ones who did the most work or the most prominent in that work. So that's why it's a thing to be called a first named author in a journal article. Because that's the seat of most prominence. So those are the people that are quoted. So when you have like an et al. So according to Whitaker et al., and it could be Smith et al. Or Jones et al. Or Chang et al. Or Lopez et al. It doesn't matter. So whatever the last name is, the first person that's cited in that in your work, you're going to go ahead and use their name. and then et al. Will be for the rest of it. So this is when you have 4 or more authors. So if you wanted to do this, a paraphrase, a recent study on gun violence found a rise of 20% since 2012. You notice that at the bottom, on the second example, in the parenthetical, we just have Whitaker et al., which basically means Whitaker and everyone else, 2019, page 471. You'll go ahead and write all of the names when you do it in your works cited, but for the sake of brevity, so you're not writing all these names over and over and over and over again, that's why et al. Is implemented as a kind of a time saver and a space saver. Now, what happens if people are referencing authors within their work? So this is how you would do it. Let's say that Whitaker is mentioning Koskov in his work. So what you would do is you would just say that Koskov is mentioned in Whitaker. So here's how you would put it. A meta-analysis of the data shows long-term trends suggesting a lack of civic engagement. Koskov, 2011, so that's the actual work that was mentioned. And then the paper that you're actually reading and citing is Whitaker et al., page 471. So Koskov, 2011, in Whitaker et al., 2019, page 471. So this is about as complex as you can get it. So just something to think about. Now, the APA Works Cited page, this is what it should look like for a news source: last name, first initial, middle initial, year, month, date, title of article, date of publication, and the URL. Because for the newspapers you're using electronic sources primarily, almost exclusively, it's really important that you include the full URL. So when you click on the URL box inside there, so you can when you actually can type the web address, you need to do the entire thing. So you need to make sure that it's the entire web page that particular article is on. It can't just be theguardian.com. It's got to be the whole thing. And so you'll notice right here, I put Lee. So that's the last name is Lee. First initial is B. And then it was in 2020, March 4th. So you're noticing year, month, date. Title, Bond movie, No Time to Die, Bush back till November. That's the title. Then we have it. The publication was The Guardian. You notice it's all separated by periods. And then you put the entire URL. So it's not just The Guardian, it's the whole thing. Make sure you do that. And then when you're doing a works cited page for a journal article, that's how you would go ahead and take care of it this way. And you could do, if there's several authors, you would go ahead and include that, the year, the title of the article, the title of the periodical, the actual title of the journal it was published in, and then the volume number and issue number, and then the page number. So if we look right here, Dodds and Funnel, 2018, From Casino Royale to Spectre, Daniel Craig's James Bond, Journal of Popular Film and Television. You notice that it's italicized, indicating that that's the journal of publication. Then we have the volume number. The issue number is in parentheses, and the page number 2 through 10. Don't get too daunted about this. You just basically paint by numbers. Go ahead and just follow the examples that I post here. And I also took the liberty of posting the examples. If you go ahead and look at the prompt for the hot news assignment for the hot newspaper, I actually took the liberty of putting up what the works cited entries should look like in your prompt. So if we're looking at the Chicago format, I have a feeling that if you've done Chicago, that you've probably done a bit of it before. It's a relatively technical format. So there's a couple of tricks that I would recommend for you if you've been doing Chicago. If you need help with it, please, I like to talk about Chicago more through office hours and actually get our hands dirty actually doing some examples. But just a couple of things. If you're doing Chicago, make your works cited page first. It's so much easier. Because you can use the works cited, citation, like your works cited page citation, as a foundation for your footnote, because a lot of the elements are the same. Because the footnotes that you put in are going to be the full citation with the specific name, the specific page or the page range used. Then you'll have a truncated citation, which is a shortened version of that for every other citation you use. And then if you use the same citation over and over and over and over again, after the third one, you can just use IBID, which basically means after 2 citations, if it's the same, that it, oh, by the way, this is the same page. I'll demonstrate this in the next slide. So here's what this is what your footnote would look like for the first time. You only do the full citation the first time, and you notice that there's no page range, or there's no like 190 to 200. It's not like a full article. You're noticing it's just a page 189. So you do that one citation. Now, the next time that we ever have to cite this, we would go ahead and use the last name, and you notice it's just the last name. There's no need to use the full name anymore. And we've also shortened the title from, instead of Islamic Bomb Development of the Pakistan Nuclear Program, we've just shortened it to Islamic Bomb, and then we've had page 190 to 191. Now, let's say that we reference page 190 to 191 again, and then we needed to reference it again. On the third time, you would use IBID, but that's only if you've already mentioned it beforehand, and it's the exact same thing. So it's a little confusing when and when not to use IBID. Good rule of thumb is if you're using the exact same citation sequentially, like I'm using page 191 and then I'm citing page 191 again, and then I'm citing page 191 again, you can use IBID to save yourself some space. But the minute you go to page 192, you've got to go back to that second one, that middle one, because that's the truncated one. The one at the top, you only need to do once in your entire paper. You've established that we know what you're talking about. Then for the rest of the paper, you're going to kind of fill in the middle for most of it, because you're going to be jumping back and forth probably when it comes to, larger papers or papers that involve multiple sources. But if you need more clarification on Chicago, because Chicago has some funny rules sometimes, and it can take a little handle of getting used to. But I'd be happy to answer it through office hours and actually get our hands dirty doing it if you do use Chicago.